tell you what, there's nothing more important than somebody that lives dead center of a big city understanding what it takes to get a carton of milk or a bag of oats onto their grocery store shelves, right?
I'm Carson Jorgensen. And this is the Carson Jorgensen Podcast. Hey everybody, today's episode is brought to you in part by Crofter Market. Visit crofter.com for more information on how you can buy local food, support independent producers, and help push back against the fight on globalization of agriculture. Again, that's crofter.com for more information. Thanks for joining us here today. Got a special guest today, somebody from north of the border. Some of you may know him, some of you may not, but he has some great videos on YouTube. I'm sure you'll watch him after this. Quick Dick, thanks for joining me today, man. We're a long ways away, but man, it's been good to get together.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. It's crazy the world we live in now that we can all kind of connect like this. I mean, I prefer stuff in real person, but I mean, for people that have distances between us, like you and I here right now, this is obviously a good alternative, right? So
yeah, no, it works out good, and honestly, it connects the world between people. Let's just tell our story because we both come from agriculture. Like, say, I'm a sheep rancher. We have about 5,000 head of sheep. You're out in Saskatchewan, and you feed cows, and man, I'm telling you, it's nice to be able to get together and to tell our story.
yeah, it absolutely is, man. And I think I think telling our story is going to be a bigger thing. It's great for us to be able to chat and compare contrast what we have going on in ag. But I think a bigger part of what we need to continue to do in agriculture is to make sure our story gets told to urban centers more than rural. It's always great for all of us to sit around, chew the fat, and talk about what we do, how we do things different. But I'll tell you what, there's nothing more important than somebody that lives dead center of a big city understanding what it takes to get a carton of milk or a bag of oats onto their grocery store shelves, right?
Right, like your protester diets video on YouTube when you talk about what it takes to get canola to where it goes, and people don't understand that, and it comes back to the old cliche thing. It's like, where does food come from? Well, it comes from the store. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the root of the problem. And I thought with COVID helped a little bit with that, and I thought there would be some silver lining to COVID. That people are going to show up and they're going to understand where food comes from and be more apathetic that way. But it helped for about 6 minutes, and now we're back to where we were before.
But that's a testament to the times we kind of live in here now. We're almost, and I mean, I'm just guilty of it too. There's lots of times you can find yourself going a lot of different directions on social media. It's hard to keep up with news feeds sometimes, depending on where you're getting your news from, and there's just so much going on all the time, right? But yeah, COVID did a great job. If there was one thing that did come out of it that was decent, that would have been it, as people started looking critically at not just food supply chains, but supply chains in general. All of a sudden, there's people wouldn't be able to get parts or wouldn't be able to get different types of clothes or this or that kind of thing. And I think it just kind of made people look a little more critically at everything. But like you say, it doesn't take very long for people to just set the cruise control and get back into their lives where everything just magically shows up, right?
No, and I mean, that's how people are. And we talk about it in agriculture all the time. You know how it is. You go down to the coffee shop or, sit at the dairy freeze, and people are chewing the fat and talking about it. And yeah, we put ourselves on cruise control. We sit and whine about policies that they're making from the top level down. And I ask people, I said, when's the last time you ran for office, or when's the last time you attended a meeting or school board or whatever else? And nobody does, because good people are, and I hate to say it this way, but I'm going to, good people are out making a living. Good people are out doing a job. And you get a lot of people who become politicians who have literally never done anything in their lives. And then they come back and they make policy for farmers and ranchers. And we wonder why we're in the position we're in. Well, it's pretty easy.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, and we were maybe mentioning this just a little bit before we started going here, but I come from a pretty cowboy upbringing kind of thing. I mean, I grew up on a community pasture in central eastern Saskatchewan, Canada. I mean, we call it the parkland region kind of thing, but lots of lakes, lots of rock, and lots of trees. You get a little farther out of our neck of the woods, it's quite arable land as well, but we got a really, really good mixture of both grain and livestock in this neck of the woods. And, my dad was a pretty hardcore cowboy, and we always grew up like, are we going to this ag show here in Saskatoon? Or not, well, don't have time to go to an ag show. You know what I mean? We got hay to haul, right? Or be the wintertime where we're going to go to crop production. Well, who's going to feed the cows and drill the dugouts? So, I mean, we just kind of, your job, as far as dad programmed us, was you stay on the farm and you work to make the farm profitable, right? And I think
they had kids for a reason. I mean, why'd have kids unless you need slaves, right?
Yeah, but like I think you see that paradigm shifting a little bit now, and I've done a lot of different podcasts and talks with people on generational farming and what we're looking at with the new generation coming in. I mean, let's say yours and mine generation of farming. I think we're in a cool spot for the simple fact that, I mean, we came from a school that didn't really have much for technology, but had all the work ethic in the world. They wanted life to be better for us. So, I mean, I'd say we're probably living in one of the best generations right now. I mean, we've got that hard work ethic instilled in us, but at the same time, we're open to technology because we kind of grew up, through the technology boom kind of thing, right? And now with the next generation that's going to be coming in after us, I think they're still in a great spot because there's still that work ethic that's instilled in them. But the focus and the importance of technology, I think, is going to be one thing that we really need to keep focusing on in agriculture. And part of that is even what we're doing here now is going to make people more accessible. The more time we can get freed up for ourselves on the farm, the more time we can do important things like what you've been doing is trying to get involved in government policy and start making a difference. Because, like, say, if we just stay on the farm and we never leave the farm, I mean, we're just going to have somebody that grew up in the middle of a city that thinks that the avocado that they got is somehow not affected by a carbon tax here in Canada. Well, they don't realize that it came from California or Mexico on a plane or a truck, and that it's one of the most carbon intensive things they're ever going to eat in the morning. And they're going to eat that, and then they're going to go down to the climate change protest and say how we need to lessen our carbon footprint. You know what I mean? Or you're like, well, hold on a minute here.
How many Chilean villages had to give up their drinking water for you to eat that avocado? Like,
or to chase it down with an almond milk. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
But those are the conversations that our predecessors in our generations prior to us never had. And I think that's kind of an important distinction. Yeah, we had them amongst ourselves, but we never told our story outside of that. And that was really how I got introduced into social media. Is, I made a video and it kind of went viral, and I didn't even know what I was doing. I was just like, you guys don't understand. Like, we're not trying to hurt these animals. We're not trying to make anybody's lives a living hell. We're not trying to poison you. Like, we're literally trying to provide food for you, and you hate us for it. And that was really my beginning. And it's one of those don't read the comments type of videos, because I was really naive to what actually went on in the real world. And I'm sure you get it, but we are more now able to tell our story than ever. And it's time we stop letting other people tell our story for us.
That's probably one of the bigger things that we really need to focus on. I mean, I know it's similar in the States as it is to Canada here, but I mean, we've got a lot of different advocacy groups and boards and everything that is technically kind of their job to do it, kind of thing. But I'll share a quick story with you here. I was at a community meeting in a community just a little bit to the north here. It was the Chamber of Commerce of the town that was putting on this meeting, and they actually had their what would be the equivalent to the governor of what you guys have in the States was actually their MP was there and representing that community, and he was there to speak. And he was talking about telling our stories and telling us how it was, it's our job to combat against the Trudeau government and some of these other people that are trying to work against the narrative that what we do is actually good for the world and good for the environment. And he's telling us it's our job to get our story out there. And I kind of took issue with him saying that, because I was like, man, like, we pay you guys a lot of money in tax dollars, and I'd say it's just as much your guys' job as it is our job. But I mean, who's to say that a member of parliament here in Canada wouldn't buy a slot? Everybody does it. I mean, you guys have got your news networks down in the States there too. If we've got a very left-wing news outlet that's working against what we have going on, at the end of the day, news outlets are all for sale anyways, because they want to sell advertising so that they don't fold. So go pick a handful of your left-wing news outlets and buy some airtime on them and run some ads. And like, some of our biggest problems is downtown Toronto, downtown Vancouver, downtown Ottawa, downtown big metro centers. These are the people that need to see this stuff, and we have access to this state broadcaster. All you got to do is pay them a little bit of money, and you can get your message up there, right? So I think us telling a story is important, but at the same time, I think there's different ways that we can go about getting the message out there to the people that need to hear it. It's going to take just the same as anything else does in the world, and that's a little bit of money, right?
Yeah, no, but I think you've parlayed your deal on YouTube. For anybody that doesn't watch this guy, you got to go watch all the videos. But you've been able to parlay a little bit of agriculture and a lot of bit of comedy into a way that's digestible and understandable to people. And honestly, like not just sucking up here, like the way that you deliver it and the way that you approach it, to me, is one of the most palatable ways because you're able to break it down into a way that's extremely entertaining, one, but two, it's broken down into its simplest forms and it's easy for people to digest and understand. And I think that that's another way we have to make it approachable. But you go on and you watch people like the Hoof GP and people in the UK, they got 2.5 million subscribers and all they do is trim cows' feet. And I'm just like, man, like what? We can't be mad about it either. It's like, you know what? But we're spreading the message of agriculture because in this world, we're less than 1% now. And we're battling against these global elites and these climate change monsters. And we're
Yeah.
unwilling to compromise what we believe because of what they want us to do. And I know that that's something you've been extremely outspoken about is the climate stuff, because honestly, that's how they're coming for us. When you look at
Yeah.
agriculture, they're going to use climate as the freaking hammer that they use to smash us all.
Yeah, they always will and will continue to do it, right? But like so like to be perfectly clear, I'm not a guy that denies that climate change is real. I mean, you go and talk
Sure.
to some guys that are on centennial farms around here. I mean, they're going to tell you, and they've actually done a pretty good job of being able to predict what's going to be happening over the next few years. They're like, we're going to head into a dry cycle. Then you rewind back to 2010 through to 2013 here, it was unmanageably wet kind of thing, right? I mean, these
Yeah.
are cycles that we go through. I've had a guy that lives just down the road from us that we rent and farm stuff is 87 years old. And the best time that I spend on the farm is driving to pick up a combine or a tractor with him because he'll point to lake beds that are dry. And he's like, that's not dry. You should have seen that in 1942 or whatever it would have been. He's like, way drier. Do you know why those trees grew in the middle of that? Because that's the only place where there was water for about 6 years, he said. So, like, if you think you've seen dry, you haven't seen drying. And then he's like, but if you think you've seen the end of water, you haven't either. Because
Right.
there I was, of course, regular guy that's out on a farm. We're out bashing in the edges of some sloughs and some stuff. We're like, well, these low spots might be the only place that we're going to be able to grow crops next year. And I had another guy, Blaine, come out and he's leaning on the hood of his truck and he's got a coffee there. So I stopped, go have a coffee with Blaine. I said, Blaine, what's going on? He's laughing. This is what's so funny. He said, you like burning diesel, don't you? And I was like, why? He's like, well, I don't know why you're working that low spot. He says, like, you might maybe get something to grow in there next year, but it'll be underwater the next year. He's like, it's not going to be dry forever. And lo and behold, the next spring, like we couldn't get within 40 feet of where it worked. And there's Blaine with his coffee cup laughing again. You know what I mean? So like like I'm pro science and I'm glad that we have climate analysts and all these different things, but I mean there's been a lot of examples over the last few years where modeling doesn't turn out to be what it was supposed to be. Take June right here in the Parkland region of this year. We've been told all year, all winter up till this point in time, it's going to be the driest and hottest summer that we've ever experienced in our lives. And June, at the end of it all, if I had the article, I'd throw it up here, was one of the coolest and dampest Junes that we've had on record in the last 20 years. You know what I mean? Well, okay, so we were wrong. Are we going to like say that, okay, yeah, maybe there's a warming trend in the globe, but I mean, everybody's going to have weather and experience it instead of it being a climate emergency and having children nowadays that have climate anxiety that are afraid to go outside? Like, what are we doing to ourselves?
Well, that's just it. I mean, and it's permeating all the way down. And these kids, they think that their lives are literally going to end. What they're being taught in school, they think they're going to die before they're adults because the climate is going to kill them all.
Yeah,
And that's not the truth. And I'm the same way. I believe that climate changes. Do I think that man has an effect on it? Maybe a little bit, but not to the point of where we're going to flood the entire planet. And
yeah,
things change. One of my favorite pictures is the picture of Plymouth Rock. And it's still got the rock where it was right by the ocean when they landed there. And it just goes to show climate does change. The world is
yeah,
cyclical. And what's funny is nobody understands it better than agriculture. Nobody,
yeah, absolutely.
they don't, because they deal with it all the time and they've kept records longer than anybody else has. And if we don't
Like
understand that the climate is cyclical, We're up in the freaking
Yeah.
night.
So let me ask you this, Carson: who's the easiest group to convince that climate change is going to end the world?
People
The
who don't
easiest
know.
group to convince that the climate is going to end the world are people that don't experience the climate.
Yep.
So people that like live in an apartment and they go into their underground parking lot and they drive their car to work or take the train to work and then they go inside and they don't experience the climate. I experience the climate, the weather, everything every single day. And I
Yeah.
can tell you that it changes and it's going to continue to change. And, you know, you look back into how did the Rockies form in Canada and you look at continental drift and how everything did. Like, do we take all these theories and say, okay, yes, climate change is it, but now we're going to be able to control it somehow? I mean, the size of this earth spinning through well, depending on whether you believe it's round or not, I guess.
Right.
But I mean,
Now we're getting into controversial topics.
but I mean, the grand cosmic scheme of what's going on, for us to be cocky enough to think that we can control what's going to happen with it, I think is ridiculous. But I think where humankind will continue to flourish and why we have for this period of time. But let's remember, we've only been on planet Earth for a tiny little piece of the time that the Earth has actually been around. You know, the reason we're going to continue to do what we do and succeed how we succeed is because we're going to continue to adapt with our planet and our climate. Like, I mean, that's how we succeed as humans. If you look at how we started versus where we're at right now, we've come a long ways. And, you know, for the one example I was using about the avocado with the person that's all worried about the carbon footprint of something, you have a lot of people that are very concerned about, you know, GMOs and different herbicides and pesticides that we use. Well, like that's technology, and that's how we continue to adapt to survive in our climate. And you know, we're starting to see the first GMO variety of wheat is going to be released here in the next little while, because we're trying to find something that's more tolerant to a dry July, which is how things are starting to trend. Well, we use science and technology to continue to do better and to survive. And like that being said, it pisses me off when I go down to the grocery store and I buy a bag of flour and it says right down and there's a stamp on it that says made with non-GMO wheat.
Right.
Well, no shit, because there's no such thing as GMO wheat. You know what I mean? Like,
Exactly. But it's that lack of understanding again.
Yeah,
people, and I'm the same way. To me, organic and GMO is just a marketing scheme for people to make more money off of most of the time. Because when you look at corn, I think what they say, almost 90% of corn varieties are now considered GMOs. And when you look at less than 1% of the population feeding the rest of them, without GMOs, half the planet would be starving right now.
Yeah.
And yet everybody wants to demonize them and everybody wants to throw them under the bus. But two, we have to have the conversation about what does GMO actually mean? Because to me, any corn is GMO because the way that they bred grasses to become corn.
Down into breeding. Any plant nowadays is going to be GMO because they've all been bred in a certain different way, depending on how you want to define it, right? And it's just like that's an issue. And I'm nothing against organic farmers or like I have nothing against anybody doing what they do. But all I'm going to tell you is that I know a handful of people that can't afford to go down to the organic grocery aisle in the store and buy their 4 kids groceries there. Hell, they can't afford to go to the regular aisle, let alone the organic aisle. You know what I mean? And like I'll park the sprayer. I'll stop putting inputs in anything anytime anybody wants me to or whatever. Right. I just need X amount of dollars for what I'm going to sell. And if everybody in the world starts doing that, number one, there's a lot of people are going to go hungry, and number two is a lot of people are going to go broke.
That's exactly it. But I mean, you're seeing farmers, ranchers go broke left and right. And this is prior to them implementing their climate change that they're about to ram down our throat. I mean, this thing is hitting overdrive right now. You watch what they're doing in Europe, the Netherlands, I mean, all over the place. And people wonder, well, ask me all the time, what's the deal with them farmers protesting in the Netherlands? Why is The Hague full of tractors? You know, why is Berlin now filled to the brim with people spreading manure all over the streets? And it's like, because they can know these farmers, they're at a breaking point. They can no longer meet these goals that these climate elitists, whatever you want to call them, want them to meet. And they've had enough, and they're losing their livelihoods and their families over it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of it where you look into, you know, that there's been some subsidy mismanagement in a lot of these cases too, and then you get like business models are built around that, and then people start relying on certain types of subsidies, and then all of a sudden when they try to change that, and then they shove all this other stuff down on you at the same time, all of a sudden you're creating this big tornado, and we see what's happening in the EU kind of thing, right? There was some stuff came down in Canada, would have been almost 2 years ago here now. Just with a fertilizer emissions reduction plan that the government was going to come in with, kind of thing. And like, people got very vocal of what was going on here, and all of a sudden it just kind of disappeared for a little while. But it doesn't mean it's gone.
It's
It's
not gone.
this
It's just hiding. Don't kid
this is
yourself.
government's way of doing litmus tests to how the public's going to react to this kind of stuff, right? And
Sure.
it's just, that's why it's very important to have, like, we have the canola growers, the wheat growers, Canadian Beef Council. We've got a lot of different groups that their job is to monitor and watch this stuff, bring it back to their members, and make sure that everyone has their say at it, right? So like, these groups are very important, but at the same time, just traces right back to what we started this conversation with, is there's a lot of people that don't understand agriculture that are trying to make decisions on how it's going to be affected. Like, at no point in time, in my personal opinion, should Environment and Climate Change Canada be implementing policies on the agriculture community of Canada. That should come from Canadian Agriculture and Food, not Climate Change Canada.
Right. But that's the problem too. We end up with people in Congress, or you end up with people in Parliament that have never stepped foot on a farm, that don't even know which end of the cow brings milk out. And yet these
Yeah.
are the people who are instituting laws and making laws about nitrogen and how much you can use and what you can do with your cows and how many you can have. And you guys are a lot worse off in Canada than we are here, because heaven forbid you guys have Trudeau. But I mean, people are like, oh, Biden's terrible. I'm like, man, Trudeau's no different. He's just younger and
Yeah.
meaner.
I'll tell you what, whether it's Canada or US, you look at the two current leaders of our countries right now, and I just ask the question: is this the best we could do?
So that's the
Out
best
of
we
our
got.
entire population, this is the best we could do.
Right.
I
Right.
just say no.
But we end up with that on a lot. But again, it comes back to what I said earlier. Like, you have good people out there that are running businesses or running farms, and they're doing all these things. And you have people that just want to control other people, so they get into
Yeah,
government. And
yeah.
and we wonder why we're in the situation we're in.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And and that's made me think a lot more critically about even just rural municipalities, counties, and stuff around here. Like, I've looked at aldermen differently and our councilors differently, just because all of a sudden you start seeing the grand scheme of what's happening where I live. And like, maybe this traces back into more of a government thing than it does agriculture, but it's conversations that I've had recently, and I think it's really relevant with what we're talking about. So it's called rural municipalities here where I live, which is essentially counties where you guys live, right?
Yeah.
And we have reeves that are here, and they represent everyone in their area, kind of thing. And you have your counselors, and that's it. And then same with the town of Foam Lake. You have your town council, you have your mayor, but it's small groups of people. And I feel that my tax dollars are spent very well here within my rural municipality and within my town. Our roads are well looked after. They're gravelled, they're maintained. The streets are looked after in town. The garbage is hauled away. The grass is cut. I'm proud of this community, and I think I emulate that in most of my videos. But the reason that these tax dollars that we pay, that we're happy with how they're administered here locally, is boils down to one word, and that's called accountability, Carson.
Yeah.
Because the people of our community are very tight knit. And I know I will see the person that's responsible for spending my tax dollars graveling roads or cleaning the streets in a town or whatever it is. And they know that if too many people have a problem with what they're doing, they're going to be held accountable for it. And that's where we slowly start losing control of what happens with, be it provincial, state, or federal tax dollars, is slowly, as this balloon grows and there gets to be more and more people that are on the top, and the bureaucracy of how these are spent, and there's more and more inefficient systems that go on, all of a sudden, like, I'm not happy with how my federal tax dollars are spent. I'm growing less and less happy with how my provincial tax dollars are spent. And that's a government that I voted for. And the reason for this is because there is lack of accountability. The bigger the bubble grows where these tax dollars are spent, right? If I was to say, what's the solution is to keep things more local than it is to try and paint an entire country with one brush and say this policy is going to work everywhere, right?
Yeah, but it's like comparing Alberta to Saskatchewan to Manitoba. It's the same as comparing California to Maine. It's everything's completely different, and that was why here in the United States, our government was meant to be local. Like, that was how it was designed. But now we've created this giant oligarchy we call the federal government, and they are cumbersome, they are big, they are inefficient, and we wonder why we're at $34 trillion in debt. I remember when I was running for Congress 6 years ago, it was like 17 trillion. It's like, we have almost doubled it. And when you start to think about how much money $34 trillion actually is, it is absolutely unbelievable and nearly unfathomable at the size of the money that we are now
Yeah.
just blowing. I mean, it's $40 billion here, it's 50 billion to the Ukraine. It's we're borrowing money to fund it, but yet, and all of this comes around. You know who the bad guy is? It's the agriculture, it's the farmers,
Oh
it's the
yeah.
ranchers. They're ruining the planet. They're going to kill us all, and it's all their fault.
The one thing that really made me realize that that our current federal government had absolutely no concept of numbers whatsoever is when they came out and they made an election promise. I believe it was in 2019 that they were gonna plant 2 billion trees. They're gonna plant 2 billion trees. And I was like, you guys have no clue what a billion is, do you? Not one clue. It's just a B beside a number that you write checks for and everything, and you really can't wrap your head around it because 2 billion trees. You're going to plant 2 billion trees, and you've ever went out and planted one tree. I would ask you first of all how you managed to accomplish that in your 4-year term, and number two, where are you going to find the workers to do it?
Yeah. But they don't know, and
No.
nobody, again, nobody holds them accountable, and people vote. The only time I've told people this, and when I do it again, I'm going to spend all campaign money 3 weeks prior to the election, because that's the only time anybody cares, is
Yeah.
leading up to an election. Guess what? When the election's over, everybody just goes back. I was sitting in a room once, and this is where agriculture and politics really collide, because people don't understand, and we wonder why we're in this problem. I was sitting in this room, and I asked people, like, do you know who your state senator is? Like, do you know? Dude, nobody had any idea. There were
Yeah.
300 people in that room. 2 people in the room knew who their state senator was. And to
That is not
me,
good.
like, you've voted, you probably voted for that person at one point or another, and you don't know who it is. And it's this apathy that we have, and we don't do our jobs, and that's something that we have to get better at. But when it comes to agriculture, even more so, like more than ever, if we're going to survive in ag, you know this as well as anybody, we've got to start sticking up for ourselves,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to the climate, especially when it comes to things like GMO, because it's just going to keep getting worse. Because for some reason, I know the reason, but nobody else does, it seems like, anymore. They want to make agriculture the bad guy. And when you
Yeah.
see any hostile takeover of any country or any population center in the past, and change them to, heaven forbid, communism, first thing they do is they go after agriculture.
Yeah, absolutely. Like one thing I've tried to do differently, I guess, you mentioned protest or diets earlier there kind of thing. And I've like, it was catchy, and it was like, I was trying to, like, if you look at the video, be like, oh, he's trying to own anti-farm activist kind of thing or whatever, which technically it's what I was trying to do at the time. I was just like, hey, get off my back kind of thing. But like I've changed how I do productions sometimes. Sometimes I go back to that character because that's people like a laugh. They like to know that they're not alone, and they like to know that there's a voice on their side that's saying maybe what they can't or don't know how to say kind of thing. So I keep doing stuff like that every now and then. But every now and then I also like to mix in. I'll just put out like just a video. One of my favorite ones that I've done recently is it was about a year ago, and it was like, what is silage? And all I did is I took a drone with me in the morning and I caught some sweet drone footage. I did a little bit of commentary on the ground, and then I came home, and it took me about 3 nights. And I did some very heavy editing where I did transitions and I cranked some upbeat music into the background. And I was like, I don't want to make this a video of like, ha, ha, look at you guys. You need us to live. I was just like, here's what we do and how can I make it look cool? And I think I accomplished it on that one, because usually when I do videos like that, they don't go much over 100,000 views. And that one hit, bang. And then all of a sudden, I'm on 2, 3, 4 different alternative podcasts that I never would have been on before. And they're just being like, hey, what's up with this stuff kind of thing, right? So
Right.
like, that's a way that we can kind of accomplish this mission. I even started doing shorts now on social media where it's just like 60 seconds, like we were semen testing bulls a little while ago. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do semen testing in 60 seconds, so you don't want to show like every part of it, but you just
Right.
want people to have an idea that we need to do this process to protect our investment in this bull, to make sure that when he goes out that we're going to be able to get calves off of these cows, but
Right.
some people aren't going to sit and listen to a 10-minute YouTube video on it, but some people are going to take 60 seconds and be like, oh, I didn't know that's how that worked. And I think
Yeah.
that's slowly chiseling away at what we need to do, right?
And it's convincing though. Like we've had a few documentary crews here at the ranch, and like in the beginning, man, it was like pulling teeth to get my dad and my
Yes.
grandpa and everybody else. They're like, "Yeah, we don't want anybody here. We don't want to deal with it. We don't want any of it." But at some point, somebody has to do
Somebody's got to
something.
do it, man.
And unfortunately, we find ourselves at that cusp, like you said in the beginning. Like I was raised in a time when Apple II's like the brand new thing, man. Like that was the very first computer they had at the school. And now we're doing this. And how far we've come in just our lifetime is astronomical. And where we'll be in 10 more years. I mean, the way that it's coming around and the what changes are coming in agriculture and what changes are coming in media and the ability to disseminate that information, it comes back to we don't have a choice anymore. I truly don't believe that we can't stick our heads under a rock anymore, or we're going to become non-existent. My
Yeah.
family, we're 7 generations deep here now, and if it wants to make it to 7.5 or 8, like we're going to have to start talking about it, because
Yeah.
without it, it's gone.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And that's conversations like this are great kind of thing. I've tried to get outside of my silo a little bit, if that's what you want to call it. And I've had people. I do stuff on oil and gas and natural resources and stuff every now and then. I worked oil and gas for 19 years. I understand how important it is, and how we all rely on it. Agriculture relies on it, and oil and gas relies on agriculture. You try and paint the picture that we're all kind of in this same little boiling pot together, and we need each other to float, right?
Sure.
But like to try and get outside of your comfort zone and get onto podcasts and different radio programs, and that make you feel uncomfortable. That's a good place for you to be, because it means you're in front of an audience that you typically wouldn't be in front of, and that's a good place to be. I've done a couple of radio interviews. One guy was downtown Toronto. The other one was downtown Calgary, and they were definitely not my listening crew, but
Sure.
we had a conversation. It was candid, and I made my point. A lot of it was to do with carbon tax on both occasions. And at no point in time was the interviewer pushing back too hard on me or questioning anything that I said, because I think they kind of get sideswiped a little bit. They'll see a quick dick video, and then we actually start talking in real life. They'll be like, "Oh, okay, well, maybe this guy
He's
maybe
not
knows a
that
little."
bad.
Yeah. But in both instances, as soon as I got off the air on the programs and they kind of went back to their regular programming, all of a sudden, then the radio host was just full of opinions of how I was wrong with what I was saying. I was like, well, you didn't want to bring that up when you had me there to have a conversation about it, or what?
Right, right. Well, you didn't actually want to talk about it. You just want to
Yeah.
throw, because 9 times out of 10, guess what? The science isn't on their side. And that's what's so frustrating to me. This is a funny point. So I got invited to speak on the main panel at a congressional climate change summit. And I'm like,
Right.
why would you guys, you honestly don't know who you're inviting to this thing. So I'm sitting on this panel with some of the most influential people in the state and in the country. And we're on the main panel, and the first words out of my mouth were, I don't believe that man-made climate change is an existential threat to humans. And I think everybody in the audience just collectively gasped at the same time, like, who let this guy in here? And I just said, but with that being said, like, if you want to have this conversation, let's have this conversation, because last time I checked, agriculture is the only industry that has a net zero carbon emission. Like, if you want to talk about it, like, let's talk about it on the correct terms. We're not forced to accept your version of it. We can have our own. And too often conservatives, or whatever you want to call them, they get it in their head that we cannot talk about, we can't engage it, or we give credence to it. It's like, no, I can have a conversation. I don't have to agree to your terms, but we can have this conversation. And too often we pull ourselves out of that conversation because we don't even want to talk about it. And then you're left with a bunch of idiots sitting at the table making the freaking rules.
Yeah, that's probably one of the biggest things that social media is doing to us, as a society, whatever. It's getting us to the point where we don't want to have uncomfortable conversations, and that's why you have block on Twitter and all these different things, because all of a sudden somebody's saying something that you don't want to hear. You just don't want to engage with them anymore. You just want to engage with people that are with your mindset, kind of thing. And that's a very unhealthy thing to do as human beings on both sides, of be it the political spectrum or the climate spectrum or the agriculture spectrum, whatever it is, right? What's gotten us as far as humans is healthy and meaningful conversation and debate. You know what I mean? And at the end of it, you still need to be able to have a beer with the other person or sit down, have a coffee, whatever it is with you, and just be like, hey, you know what? Maybe we're not going to meet on this point, but there's like 99.9% of the human beings that you'll sit down with in your life at some point in time, you're going to come across something where you both share a common ground, and you can just start with that and then build out from there. Don't get me wrong. I like to have a good old fashioned roll in the dirt debate kind of thing with some people that want to cancel me or my way of life. But at the same time, there's got to be some reason that they're doing what they're doing too. So let's get that all figured out. Let's get all the dust off the table and see why we're all at where we're at. I'm obviously going to stand up for agriculture because I have a vested interest in it. But at the same time, I know the parts of agriculture that are very good for planet Earth, and how there'd be a lot of planet Earth would not be as flourishing and great as it is right now if we didn't have agriculture at all.
Sure. And that's the meaningful conversation we engage in. And I just think we can't take ourselves out of the position to be able to actually have those conversations, because too often I think we do, because you and I both know like agriculture is a way forward. Like people are talking about sequestering carbon. Like we're going to build these giant facilities and they're going to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. It's like, yeah, it's called plants.
Yeah, we already do it. Yeah.
We already do that. Like, and cows and sheep and all grazing livestock, they play into that because they're refreshing that. It's growing again. We're playing that cycle, but they don't want to acknowledge it. And why do you think, you've seen it as much as, if not more than anybody, why do you think that they always want to demonize agriculture? Why is agriculture at the center of it all?
I think there's a lack of understanding. Like our split in Canada here. I'm not sure what it is in the US, but we're 80% rural, 20% urban, right? So right off the bat, you're dealing with a lower population kind of thing, right? And then of that 20% in Canada, 2% are farming in Canada is what our numbers are here, right? So it's an easy demographic to target because there's not a lot of people there, right? And same thing, people are very busy in agriculture. But I think that a lot of people that try and demonize agriculture have the predisposition that people are dumb farmers, right? Which if you ever come and spend more than 10 seconds on a farm, you'll find that some of the smartest people on planet Earth actually farm and understand, agriculture, horticulture, animal culture, aquaculture, absolutely everything, right? But it just seems like an easy crowd to pick on, right? And that being said, I don't think a lot of people understand agriculture. The carbon thing has been something to watch that I never would have thought I'd see happen in my lifetime. But to have a word that's basically one of the building blocks of life demonized so terribly, without carbon, we have no plants on the planet.
We all poor people.
It's the building blocks of life. That's how plants create oxygen for us to breathe. And our government has come up with a way that they want to call it a carbon tax. And so they want to tax you for what you emit. And they have actually no really solid and scientific way of measuring it. Everything that you look at, how they measure things in Canada, is an estimate, right down to this last fertilizer emissions cap that they were trying to set.
It's always an estimate. That's the problem.
Yeah, if you look at our national inventory report, absolutely everything is based off of what they feel would be prescribed fertilizer rates for X crops across 40 zones throughout Canada. Well, there's more than 40 zones of cropping throughout Canada to start with. And secondly, everybody has different rates. Like we do variable rate fertilizer, where we do complex soil testing, and we have a prescribed fertilizer rate that we're going to go out with. I mean, we use as little of everything as possible for what the plants need, but to make sure that next year we're going to grow a crop again. You're always farming for next year, right? And it was such an infuriating thing when we saw this come out from the government, because like, here's a bunch of us that have got hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in these programs, and the government's coming to tell us that we need to do 30% less than what we're doing. We're like, hey, we're already doing as little as possible for fertilizer inputs here. Like we're not drug dealers trying to get our plants hooked on nitrogen. You know what I mean? Like, so it just shows the great misunderstanding of what's going on. And then now you see that there's a possible, I believe was it Denmark? I think it was, where they're implementing a tax on methane emissions from cattle.
Yeah.
At which point in time, I'd be like, well, where's that data coming from? And how are you measuring what's coming off the cattle for methane, if that's the case? Because we all know that depending on what the ruminant animal's eating for plants, their emissions are going to be different. So how are we classifying that? And then what are we going to take into, like, how do we take into effect the carbon that they sequester throughout the course of their life by grazing? Where are we quantifying that, and how do we measure that? And how do you compensate me for what I'm sequestering versus what I'm emitting? Like,
Right, you're gonna go build $10 billion facility to sequester it. Like, we should be getting paid for what we're taking out. Like, if you're gonna tax us on what we're putting out, you better tax us on what we're taking out. And so just the other day, and it's funny you mentioned this, because just the other day I wrote an op-ed in the state newspaper here, but it was about a national deal that's been run through Congress. It's already through the Senate right now. It's called the Prove It Act, and what it is a study into carbon emissions. They are green lighting a study into carbon emissions. Well, they did this in Europe. It was called the CBAM. And guess what it turned into? Carbon tax. And I said this, I said the Prove It Act is a step backwards. And the reason it is a step backwards is because never, and they're saying, oh, it's just a study. It's just a study. We're just studying. When have you ever seen government receive an avenue to step forward, increase regulations, and take in a tax and then walked away from it? Because I've never seen it.
never.
But that's what they're doing.
That's how GST, goods and services tax, started in Canada. It was a war measure to pay for the war is what was going on. And as soon as the war was paid for, we'd never see GST again, and we still have it 5%.
Still there today.
Right?
I remember that. I spent time in Canada. I was like, what is this tax they are putting on here?
Provincially here, like, we pay a provincial sales tax, and they just they tagged it onto a whole bunch of other things here recently, and then they added it to car sales. So now even if you sell a used car, every time that car changes hands, you got to pay provincial sales tax on it as well. It's like every time you turn around, you're tax, right?
Yeah.
I'm actually,
and margins are so slim right now for farmers, and the cost increases and the price of fertilizer, things like that. What I don't understand is twofold, and maybe you can help me with this, because nobody else has been able to help me understand why, because you've talked to enough people in this sector. But why does the general population or the government believe, again, back to your point, that we are trying to put on way more fertilizer than we need, that we're spraying way more chemical than we should be, that we're overgrazing it so that it won't be there next year? Because for me, it's like, okay, we're going to put on as little fertilizer as humanly possible, and we're going to maximize everything we can off as little as possible. We're going to spray as little as we have to, because every time we have to pay a chemical bill, it's plenty big. So we're probably going to spend as little. And why would we want to overgraze and ruin a grazing pasture when we know we have to come back to it next year? Farmers and ranchers are the original environmentalists, and I don't care what anybody says about it, because
100%.
we want it better next time, because it's our own selfish interest that's driving that.
It's like, absolutely right. The other part of it too is like, in most circumstances, an agricultural operation is prepping that operation to pass down to the next generation. Like, it's generational farming. It happens everywhere. And like, that's just the nature of the business, right? There's nobody here that isn't getting their farm ready for the next generation. By doing that, they're ensuring that soil health and microbiology is there, and that they have sufficient storage capacity, that the equipment's in good shape, that everything's in working order. You want to be able to sell or to pass down this farm to your next generation, essentially on cruise control. Now, there's no such thing as cruise control in agriculture, because we're going to continue to improve every year. But you want it in good running order and a viable business. And that's when I hear the word sustainable, like, this is such a catchphrase that we have nowadays, is sustainable. I always ask people, can you define what sustainable is for me? Are you talking environmentally sustainable? Are you talking fiscally sustainable? Like where does this word fall here? Because as far as I'm concerned, you need to check all those boxes off to be a proper and profitable agricultural operation, right? So I think sustainability is something that naturally occurs in successful farms. And I don't know if anybody knew this or not nowadays, but unsuccessful farms do not continue in business.
They don't live.
No,
they don't. With input costs as high as they are, the cost of tractors, the cost of equipment, the cost of fuel, cost of nitrogen, whatever it is, it's astronomical. So if you're not running a tight ship and you're not prepping for the future, it isn't going to exist. It's just not. Mm-hmm. And if you're doing a poor job, and that's why, like, a true free market that really doesn't exist, to where people that are doing a bad job just go away. But that doesn't exist anymore, because the government's picking winners and losers.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, our previous federal ag minister, it's Lawrence McCauley now here in Canada federally. And before that, we had a lady named Marie-Claude Bibeau, and she had absolutely zero agriculture experience whatsoever. She owned a tourism business before she
She
came
read a
as our.
book.
Can you please tell me what business you have being Minister of Agriculture if you have absolutely no agricultural experience whatsoever? We've got a great ag minister here in Saskatchewan, provincially, Dave Merritt. The guy's a farmer.
Yeah.
Doesn't that make sense?
Oh
A guy
yeah.
that farms and knows of farming and has been successful in farming, probably a good guy to have in government being like, hey, let's talk about policy and what's happening, right? Lawrence McCauley is, whether he used to be in lobster fisheries back on the East Coast, I'm not quite sure what it was, but I can promise you he doesn't really know a lot about growing a bushel of wheat.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
business is that guy got to be in the position that he's in right now?
No, exactly. And I've actually been in contact and in conversations with the Trump campaign and with the Trump administration. I have some people that work there and are close to the president and met with him once. And my one request to them, and this is my only request when he wins this election and we get rid of these communists at the top, was that he put somebody in as the Secretary of Agriculture who is actually a farmer or rancher. That was my only request. I'm like, if you guys do nothing else for agriculture, put somebody at the top who's not a part of the lobby, who doesn't represent these big corporations or never has. I want you to pick somebody off the ranch or off the farm who understands this and is savvy about trade policy and what's actually happening, and let them run and give them the fortitude to be able to do what they need to do, because that's what it's going to take. Because again, like you alluded to earlier, it's the big lobbies, it's the big money that are running agriculture right now from the top, and they do whatever they've got to do to survive, and they answer to whoever pays their bills.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, and that's we see it's happening provincially too. I'm not going to let my provincial government get away on this. Usually, like in the past, I've supported them heavily. They're having some issues of their own right now, but we see it's almost like you're a part of a club. It happens
Sure.
provincially more frequently now than it used to, but federally as well. You see, even like Trudeau's cabinet that he had, it's mostly guys that were at his wedding party, that were in his wedding party and everything. It's your elite group of people, and that's who you bring in. And as far as I'm concerned, if you're a political leader leading a province, leading a country, leading a state, whatever it is, your job should be to surround yourself with the best people in the business that know what they're talking about, not somebody that did Jaeger bombs with you at the bar at your wedding.
Yeah, that's but too often that's what we see. And again,
Yeah.
I blame it on farmers and ranchers for the lack of accountability that they force the people at the higher ups to have. And that starts in their organizations all the way to the top. And when you let
Yeah.
them slide with it at the bottom, it just trickles up. It continues to go. They're like, well, they're not going to hold me accountable for this. So I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to do what pads my pockets. I mean, you look at the sheep industry. Prime example, Canada used to have a thriving sheep industry too. It's still fairly decent. But we used to have 56 million sheep in the United States. Now there's less than 5. I mean, you tell me why our population has tripled in the same time that we've lost 90% of our sheep industry. And it's not
Yeah.
consumption. I mean, people are still eating it. We have just opened our doors to the wolves and these free traders from across the world. They are absolutely
Yeah.
taking advantage of our hot market in any way that they can. And we're not protecting our domestic agriculture. I'm sure Canada is the same way.
Yeah. And you know what? You and I might fight a little bit on beef kind of thing, but we'll just leave that alone.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But no, like it's true, and I mean, trade's obviously a very important thing globally, especially when it comes to agriculture products. There's a lot of places, Indonesia, India, Pakistan. There's lots of places that rely on imports, right? They just don't have the ability to be able to feed their populations, right? And that's
Sure.
where places like Canada, Saskatchewan specifically. I mean, like we export over 75% of what we produce here in the province. Like we're only a province of 1 million people. And I mean, we're one of the largest exporters of agricultural foods in Canada, and like that's for a reason. We have the arable acres here in Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba. I mean, this is big farming area here. And, so like trade's one of the most important things to us. And when we have agriculture being underrepresented, not only on a provincial stage, but on a federal and a global stage, like that's a big deal. There was one thing that went down here recently. It was last year. I kind of did a little upload on it there. Our provincial government actually went over to, I believe it's COP28. And so like here's a climate conference in Dubai, where all these people that are talking about how we need to mitigate use of fossil fuels to save the earth jump on their private jets and fly over to the middle of a city that's built in the middle of a desert that lives on oil and gas, that was built by oil and gas. They're going to go have a conference to talk about how this is killing the planet. Well, I got to give kudos to our provincial government, because our feds weren't really sending anybody over there to represent what we do. They were sending representatives over there. Stephen Guilbeault, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change here in Canada, went over to talk about how we're going to put a cap on oil and gas production in Canada. While our province sent a delegation over there, and they got a booth worth $700 and some odd $1,000, spent over $1 million going over there to do this. And their goal was to showcase how environmentally conscious we are here in Saskatchewan, the carbon footprint, and how we can do low-till farming much more efficient than anybody else on the face of the planet. And they went over there to showcase the side of agriculture that nobody ever talks about. And I'll tell you what, they had a good reception there, because they were like, what, you guys mean farming's good? That's interesting. Let's talk more about this, right?
Well, that's just it, though. Most people don't even know. Even at the highest level, they don't understand. I mean, they've been fed this their entire life from the time they're in kindergarten, that the climate's going to kill them. And then they become adults and go through university, and they dump gas on the fire. And then they become politicians or aides or whatever it is to these big organizations. And they're still feeding the same thing. And you present it to them in a way to where they can understand it, and it eases off a little bit. And kudos to your government for doing that, because I think we need more of that.
But you should have seen the heat that they took from the left side of the political spectrum here in Saskatchewan over doing that. Like, how dare they spend money to go over and tell our story on over $56 billion worth of trade that we do agriculturally. Like, yeah, how dare we do that? Because I don't know if you guys know it or not, but if we don't have oil and gas, we don't have agriculture, we don't have resources of mining here in Saskatchewan, the hospitals don't stay open.
The schools don't stay open.
Schools don't stay open. We have absolutely nothing, because that's what pays the bills here. So I want to keep everybody looked after just the same as anybody else. But if you want any social programs whatsoever, you got to have some kind of a horse pulling the cart.
Yeah. But yet we go around and around. But farmers and ranchers, and you alluded to something there that I really want to touch on. Farmer, and it's hard to admit, because this is just what farmers don't do, but they haven't been good. Like a lot of the practices we've had in the past haven't been great. And
100%.
as time goes on, we learn new things. Technology comes around. We can do things differently. Instead of, low till or no till, we're talking a lot better manage of the microbes in the soil. We're talking, the chemicals that we're using and the processes that we're doing. We're getting better, but we haven't always been great.
No. Tell me anything on the face of the planet that has started off perfect, Carson.
Never.
Nothing. You know why?
Because other than Jesus, but
that's what we do as humans. We get better, we evolve, we continue to adapt to what's happening, and we learn from our mistakes. Are we headed in the right direction with what we're doing with our energy now, with windmills, solar, electric, all this stuff? Probably not, but we're not going to know for another how many years, right? All I know is that from where we started, gasoline was a byproduct, and they would dump it into rivers. You know what I mean? And we got figured out what to do with it and how to try and efficiently burn it. And if you look at how we burn fuel now versus how we used to do it, how we use fertilizer now versus how we used to do it, low to no till, and just look at the different technology that we use to make sure that we're actually building soil and not raping it, kind of thing. I mean, we've made huge advances in agriculture, and I'm so pumped to be a part of it right now, because we're just going to continue to keep doing it, because that's what we do as humans. We make things better. We don't progressively go and make things worse, right?
Right. And I think the other thing we have to talk about when we talk about poor agricultural practices is we've tried to keep the cost of food down. And in our quest for cheap food, we have come up with some practices that frankly aren't all that great. But if we don't do them in that way, it's vertical integration. It's whatever else. I don't like it. I don't care for it. But yet we're getting to the point to feed this growing population. There's not much choice other than those options, and to continue to grow and to become more efficient and to use things like GMOs and to be able to increase crop yields. And but yet they find a way to demonize it all the time. But it's going to be absolutely imperative to the survival of humans.
Yeah, I think we're slowly progressing to a more holistic way of producing more food. I mean, right
Yeah.
now we produce off an acre. We produce almost 2.5 to 3 times what we did in the 40s. You know what I mean? And the 40s really weren't that long. It wasn't that long ago. We've made
No.
huge strides and leaps and bounds. And we need to continue to get better. I mean, when we talk about cost of food, I mean, 99.9% of the time, I support capitalism. Is it the best system? No, but it's the one that's going to work the best, right?
Right.
Even when you look here in Canada, it's one of the biggest problems we have, especially as beef producers, of what we get paid for a finished steer on hoof versus what some poor sap has to pay for Canadian beef at the
Right.
supermarket. The gap that exists between that's something we need to fix, right? Because somewhere somebody's getting rich, and it ain't the poor bastard that's buying it at the store, and it ain't the poor bastard that's calving these cows out when it's minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit in the wintertime. You know what I mean? So see how I
Yeah.
switched to Fahrenheit for you there?
No, no, I know. I see that. And it was pretty impressive on the fly. But you're absolutely right. We have to find a way to close that gap. And there are things coming on. I'm part of a deal where it's kind of a marketplace for producers to get their product to the population. And I think
Mhm.
it's going to be a phenomenal deal if done right. But there's
Right.
room for that. And as we grow and adapt, like farmers and ranchers are having to increase their margins, and they're having to find ways to increase their margins because it's not cutting it at what they're at right now. I mean, prices that we're
Yeah.
seeing right now in the sheep industry are the same as what you had seen in the 90s and early
Yeah.
2000s, back when a truck was $10,000, not $90,000.
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
not following it, and yet you see the price go up in the store, but when do you see the prices go up for commodities?
Yeah, no, that's right. There's two different trajectories that things take on a graph versus prices. It's what consumers pay versus what producers get, kind of thing. And there's always seems to be that big gap in the middle. I mean, it's the same with oil prices versus what you pay at the pump. I mean, it happens everywhere, right? But like to close that gap, I don't really have the solutions for it. But like what I will say, Carson, kind of I guess in closing here, is I just made a couple random videos and for some reason they took off. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I was just kind of something was on my mind and I just kind of put it out to the world and for some reason it resonated with somebody and caught. If there's anybody watching out there that feels like they're proud of something that they do or they feel like they have something on their operation to show the world, you might put a whole bunch of effort into making a video and a production and posting it online, and maybe you'll only get 5 views or 10 views or 3 likes, kind of thing. I get some of my stuff that I do, I get 500,000, 1 million views on, kind of thing, and you get hundreds of thousands of likes on it, kind of thing. But I might not change anybody's mind. If you're a producer and you put something out there and you've got 5 likes, maybe all 5 of those people actually saw what you did and you changed their mind. So don't get caught up on how many people are watching. Get caught up in making sure that you continue to tell your story, because you might be changing more people than I can with my platform. And I think changing people 5, 2, 3, 1 person at a time, that's how we're going to be able to start to fight back against this.
Dude, amen, buddy. Well, there's no better place to close. So thanks for joining me, buddy. I appreciate
Hey,
it.
thanks for having me, man.
Both you and I got to go
It's
back
like a
to hauling
rundown and
hay.
get me. It's like we both farm or something, eh?
I know, right? It's like we have something in common all the way across the planet. It's not like this happens very often.
Yeah, man,
But no,
100%.
again, appreciate what you do. Keep after it. Thanks for joining me, buddy.
Same with you, Carson. Take care.